Back for another episode of Standpoint. This is a special episode, episode 18. We have here in the studio with us Paulo Figueiredo, a Brazilian journalist. Was connected with him just yesterday. We've been seeing him all over the news. He was on Dinesh D'Souza this morning, on Steven Crowder last night, talking about the issues that we're seeing from the Brazilian Supreme Court and Elon Musk. It's a real battle over free speech and what free speech really means in Brazil. It's an interesting topic, has a lot of parallels to what's happening in the United States and discussions we've been having here in our society over the last couple of years about misinformation, disinformation, false news, fake news, all the different terms for many different things. And we're seeing it play out in Brazil. It's of great interest here in the country. There was an article about it this morning in the Wall Street Journal, and I'm so excited to have someone who really knows what's going on firsthand in Brazil with us here in the studio. Paulo, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Gabe.
Yeah, first of all, it's amazing. You know, we spoke yesterday, and here you are today. You drove down to the studio. I really, really appreciate it.
I used to be here every week, but usually on the other side of the interview, doing the interview, and it's fun to be on the other side now.
It's easier, right?
It is.
Yeah, so I've done both sides when I was in elected office. Right. Had tons and tons of interviews. I think I like asking the questions better than answering them, but there's a magic to both.
There definitely is. Yeah, I'm more used to asking the questions than giving the answers, but I'm learning to do both.
Perfect. Well, you're doing a good job, that's for sure. Listen, so I'm a lawyer by background. I've been a lawyer for almost 20 years. I'm watching this free speech discussion go back and forth in Brazil. I saw it when played out with you, and now most recently it's really hitting the headlines with Elon Musk. For those who don't know or have been living under a rock, the Supreme Court of Brazil ordered Elon Musk, ordered X to cancel certain accounts that haven't even disclosed how many accounts, but apparently it includes members of the legislature there and other high profile figures,
like myself,
right, like yourself, and some that are problematic that we could talk about, but others that are really, it seems very, very subjective of what they're doing. And immediately we start thinking about free speech and what that means. So before we start, I looked online today. I want to say, okay, let's level set. As Americans, we always talk about free speech. We know the First Amendment. We kind of understand that, but we as Americans think that every legal system has the same understanding of free speech. In Brazil, it's actually a little bit different constitutionally. So what I looked up, Article 5 of the Brazilian Constitution states in relevant part that all are equal before the law, and the inviolable rights to life, liberty, equality, security, property, as follows. And subsection 4 talks about the expression of thought is to be free. And subsection 9 is free expression of intellectual, artistic, scientific, and communications, regardless of censorship or license. All of that sounds pretty much consistent with American law. What is different, though, is that hate speech under Brazilian law is not protected under this Article 5 of the Constitution.
There's a catch there. If you look at the way the things are written in the U.S. Constitution, is government, Congress shall not make any laws against free speech or against restricting. Correct. That's the way it's phrased. And in Brazil, it's phrased like everyone has the right to. So it looks the same, but it's not. Okay. The way that the government is perceived in the U.S., like you have a natural right of free speech, and the government will not infringe your right.
Correct.
Okay. So the right comes from your creator. So that's one way to see it. In the Brazilian Constitution, the right doesn't come from your creator. The right comes from the Constitution, from the paper. It's more of a French Revolution mentality instead of American Revolution mentality. So if the government gives you the right, the government can take the right away. What most people don't know is that if you look into and do it, the viewers should do it, check the Chinese Constitution. Freedom of speech is protected in their constitution as well.
Right.
So under the Brazilian Constitution, supposedly, there's no definition of hate speech. What is hate speech? What is that? So you could say anything you want, theoretically. And that's how it has been for the past 30 years or so. At least. My grandfather was president from 1979 to 1985. He was the last president of the military regime in Brazil. But when he took office, there was no censorship anymore. Censorship was down. We had for a few years before on the military regime in Brazil. So at least from 1979 to 2019, that's when all this started, you had free speech in Brazil. You could say whatever you want, and there was no such thing as hate speech. So right now they say that hate speech is not protected, but okay, tell me. You tell me, you're a smarter man than I am. What is hate speech?
Right. No, you can't define it. And also, what's interesting is in 2019, as I understand it, the Supreme Court they instigated an investigation, which is an interesting concept in and of itself, because in the United States, that would be the Attorney General. It wouldn't be the Supreme
Anywhere
Court.
in the world, but you have the same provision on on the United States, and I'll tell you the provision. It's very interesting. This is fascinating for lawyers. Okay, so in anywhere in the world where the accusatory system holds, which is most of the Western world, right? The prosecutors open the investigation. Okay, so you have a separation between the one that prosecutes and investigates, and the one that actually do the trial, which would be the judge. In Brazil, it's the same way. We have a very similar system, but there's a provision on the internal bylaws of the Supreme Court saying that if a crime is committed within the premises of the Supreme Court, they can open an investigation. Okay, so let's say someone leaks a decision that's going to overturn Roe v. Wade, then you open an investigation internally. That's when a court opens an investigation. It's an internal investigation to assess a possible crime that happened within the premises of the court. And that's not in the Constitution. It's not anywhere. It's in the bylaws and the statutes of the court.
So is that what they're using in Brazil? That's
Yes.
from 2019 to investigate third parties? They're using that power to investigate.
Exactly. So this is what they said. They're very creative, and we can get into the legal part. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a journalist and economist.
You know your stuff.
But I'm very interested in that and in the philosophy of the law. They said, well, there are people talking bad things about us on the internet. So where's the internet? Well, it's everywhere, including within the premises of the court. So therefore, we can use that to open the investigation inside the court. So the court is overseeing the investigation.
Wow.
So they brought a detachment of the federal police. I call it, I'm sorry, you're Jew, but I call the Gestapo of
the
them.
Gestapo, yeah.
Gestapo, yeah, of them, because he answers directly to Alexandre Moraes and does whatever he wants to, and pretty much their role is to persecute political opposition.
Yeah, and
but
to be clear, Alexandre de Moraes is the Supreme Court judge who's been leading this initiative.
Yes, the Chief Justice of the court. So this is how all this started. A traditional mainstream magazine published an article about associating the Chief Justice of the Brazilian Supreme Court, which before having this position was the attorney of Lula da Silva's party. Okay, so Lula da Silva, when he was president, he appointed this guy who was the attorney of the party to become a Supreme Court justice. Senate accepted it. He became a Supreme Court justice, and apparently on the list of people that has received bribery on the car wash operation, his name was in it. So a magazine in Brazil published this article. So that's when they said, well, this is slandering against the court. So let's open the investigation. Their first act was to remove the article from the magazine, remove it from the everywhere, and censor it. So that was their first act on this fake news probe. That's how it's called, was to remove an article that showed that the Chief Justice was apparently corrupt.
So just to unpack that. So my understanding of this fake news probe, they called it, I think they were doing an investigation of digital militias. They were trying to.
There are two. Then they opened a second. This was very weird. Then we started having demonstrations. The main one, the original one, is the fake news probe. Then we started having lots of demonstrations on the street, and things looked coordinated to them. And then they opened a second probe called the anti-democratic demonstrations. It's like, what? Demonstrations can't be anti-democratic. It was like people were demonstrating. That's the definition of democracy, right? So they opened that. But they committed so many procedural wrongdoings that the attorney general said, we can't join this. This is crazy. So they decided to close it, and they transferred everything to a new probe called the digital militia. And militia in Brazil doesn't have the same meaning as in the U.S. In the U.S., you have like the Second Amendment, the well-regulated militia. It's like militia is people get. No, in Brazil, militia means like a mob, like mafia. So digital militia means a group of people that are united to commit some sort of wrongdoing.
And their allegation was they were quote unquote digital militias that were out there pushing fake news narratives, which is interesting. Where they say, if you read their side of it, which I spent some time reading today, just so I can understand the other position, which is this disinformation was in and of itself was an attack on a threat to the democracy of Brazil, and therefore they had to throw them out.
That's the whole thesis, and all that looked very similar to the United States.
Yeah,
very similar. And if you look it up, and I did that before 2019, 2018, you don't remember any profiles being removed from social media. You remember Obama calling the internet the new public square. You would remember all the Democrats praising the internet, like a tool for the democracy and all that. But then Trump won, and then things started to change. They looked for a reason why did Trump win. And then you had the Cambridge Analytica articles.
Sure.
And starting in 2018, you start seeing I think it's mind-blowing, and people should look it up because I spent a lot of time doing it. You start seeing, there's an article in the New York Times, and then you start seeing every Democrat's position changing. And that's when you first start hearing about the internet as a threat to the democracy, that you need some sort of regulation, that misinformation is a problem. And start hearing that. And in in 2 or 3 months time span, you see several leaders of the Democratic Party talking about it. And then a few months later, you see all the social media changing their terms of service to include the hate speech disposition, to include the ability to remove profile. That was unheard of until 2018, 2019. And then there's a lot of connections. I can't talk about all of them, but even the Brazilian people from the Brazilian courts came to the United States. They spent some time with the FBI. This is not a conspiracy theory. It's all over the mainstream media. They spent some time with the FBI.
Everything that sounded like a conspiracy theory in the last 5 years, 90% of it turned out to be true. So
I know, and it's a problem for me because I'm by training and by personality, I'm very skeptical.
Same.
So I'm usually the last one to believe in conspiracy theories. So like election in the U.S., election in Brazil was like, I think it was Carl Sagan who used to say that extraordinary ideas and propositions required extraordinary evidences. And I'm a strong believer in that.
Sure.
But that's it. We have proof that the Brazilian people from the Brazilian court learned in the U.S. And then you had this fake news probe in Brazil, and that was used to persecute. That was open in 2019, and it's still ongoing. Now Elon Musk is in there as well. And that was used to persecute and not prosecute, technically persecute, because no one was charged. So it's a probe that has been ongoing for 5 years. It sent people to jail. It took people's passport, raided houses of congressmen, sent congressmen to prison, froze assets, a bunch of assets frozen, and it's still a probe. Did not become charges, a proper accusation.
Is there any due process? I mean, the Supreme Court is issuing these orders. They're issuing orders, like you're saying, to seize bank accounts, to seize passports, to arrest people. Is there any due process? Is there a trial? Is there an opportunity to defend yourself or any of these individuals?
So my case, for example, in 2022, I was doing mainstream media, TV, cable, prime time, number one show in the country, number one political show in the country. We used to have, it's like sometimes 3 or 4 times the viewership of CNN.
Is that a lot?
It's like
No. It was just a little dig at CNN.
Yeah, it's true. But in Brazil, they're still number 2 now. They used to be number 2, and then we got the station that I worked for was number 1. And now they're doing all right in Brazil. I think better than the US. But we used to have like number 1 by far. On December 30th of 2022, I was actually skiing in Wisconsin. And I got a phone call from someone that worked on a social media company, a source, saying, I got an order here. This is like the middle of the holidays. The lady used to do Brazil. I got an order here saying that I have 2 hours to remove your account from Brazil, to block your account to all the Brazilians. And
wow.
Only on Twitter, I had like 1.4 million people. I had 1 million YouTube and 1 million on Instagram. It was like, and so. She was like, we have to comply. There's a fine of $5,000 per hour that we keep you on. I'm like, okay. And she's like, everyone got this. Everyone, even LinkedIn. Okay. Everyone got this. So you're going to disappear in 2 hours. I'm giving you the heads up. So I got live and said, look, guys, I'm gonna die. I'm gonna disappear, and you're never gonna hear from me. Okay, that was 2022.
You were sure they were gonna come after you.
Well,
I mean, they came after your passports, your accounts, etc. But you were
then I got a call from a federal police officer, also a source, saying, look, the order against you is way broader. It's not only social media. We're canceling your passport. We're freezing all your assets in Brazil. We're disclosing all your tax returns and bank accounts to the court. We're also, there's going to be a fine every time you speak. And there's an order here on our system to detain you on site. It's not an arrest warrant, but it's an order to detain you if you get into Brazilian territory. And that's not even anywhere. It's just in our system. You're going to be detained. And that's it. It was like, wow.
Was this the first time you heard even about this probe on you, or did you know they were investigating you?
I assume, because I thought that maybe they had more respect because it was a mainstream media journalist and really big. And maybe they had a little more respect, but I had seen worse stuff happening to other people, like independent journalists. There's a gentleman called Elon dos Santos. He lives here in Florida now, under political asylum. He suffered everything that I suffered plus more, because they actually issued an arrest warrant against him, put him on an Interpol red notice list, asked for his extradition to the United States government. The United States government, even under the Biden administration, they said, we can't extradite him. He's like, there's no crimes of opinion in the U.S. And then they played videos to the Department of State people showing Alan, like saying, like, he's very aggressive sometimes. And they're like, yeah, it sucks, but it's free. It's called free speech,
right?
And they were terrified. So I assume, but my point being, that happened in December 2022. We're now in April 2024. So I don't know, 16 months or 17 months later, I haven't received not even a note, anything from the Brazilian government, not even a letter. There's no, it's nothing.
Have you appealed? Have you tried to appeal? Is there a way to appeal in the court, since it's already at the Supreme Court?
Someone tried an habeas corpus and they said, no, there's no habeas corpus for a situation like this. Most attorneys you talk to in Brazil, they say, we request access to the documents and the charges, and they all come like
redacted.
That's the word.
Were you at least able to see the basis for their decision?
No.
So basically, they came after you because you criticized the government.
I criticize. It's not about criticizing the government. There are two things you can't do in Brazil right now. One is question the electoral system, and that might sound very familiar to Americans. Yeah. You can question it. It's like the big lie. You can't talk about it if you're like.
In the U.S., you can't talk about it if you're a Republican.
Yes.
Democrats have spoken about it for years, and that's okay.
But that was the same thing. In Brazil, the people, it changed. When Bolsonaro started to defend in Brazil, the big problem is different than the U.S. The U.S. has, I know the problems the U.S. have, it's unbelievable. But Brazil has a different problem. Brazil, the voting system is all electronic. So there's no paper trail. You just put your numbers in a machine and just pray to God that they will count your vote. So the problem is that the person that counts your vote is a centralized federal court, and the president of that court is the same Justice Alexandre de Moraes.
Oh wow!
So
and it's not an open process either.
No, it's a data. You put a number in a machine, it sends you to a computer, and you hope that.
But there's no third party auditing. There's nothing. No. But I want to assure you something. You're in the United States. You could talk about this now.
Yeah, no.
But this you couldn't talk about in Brazil. And what's the second thing?
But remember, I was always in the United States. That's the tricky part. I was never under Brazilian jurisdiction. I've been living here for 10 years. My suit is in my house in the U.S. and Florida.
Wow.
So they violated the jurisdiction. I was protected under the First Amendment to say whatever I want. And even so, they came after me. And the reason why they know they can come after me is because I don't have a way to defend myself. They will do whatever they want. And what they want is they know they're not gonna send me to prison. They don't have the ability to send me to prison. They know that. But they can make my life miserable. They can cancel my locals, ask locals to shut down in Brazil. They can cancel my acts. They can cost me a lot of money. They can take me out of TV. They can ruin your life without any due process and without any consequence. That's why Elon Musk said today and yesterday that he has never seen a country breaking its own laws so much as Brazil.
Yeah, I saw that tweet just a few hours ago. This happened to you, a high-profile journalist. I'm sure it was all over the news in Brazil. Here, no, it wasn't even.
No, because the mainstream media liked it.
Oh, it was good for them.
Well, look.
I mean, it was scary for them, I'm sure, privately.
No, because the mainstream media is the establishment media. So they know they're going to be protected no matter what. They think. Because they don't.
Yeah, at some point, it'll turn on them.
Of course. But they think they've been protected now. And what this is, look, my show now, I do a show on YouTube on multiple channels because my main channel is blocked. Still, I got this afternoon 40,000 people watching live. That was more than all the other networks had on the internet. They had more on TV, but combining all their internet viewership, I was bigger than all of them combined, all of them. So if I was on TV, I know for a fact I would be number one, for sure. Like I destroyed them on every show that I made. It's like I'm not being falsely modest here right now because I know what I can do. For them, that's a nightmare. Like they're like these like old school guys who pretend they're very impartial. And I'm an opinion journalist. I'm more like a Tucker Carlson, some people say.
But you do a little more research than Tucker. Sorry.
I'm not going to say anything bad against Tucker. No, Jews are not very happy with him today. But I like Tucker. So
we'll do a whole episode on the fact that the Palestinian Authority controls Bethlehem, that he was slamming how Israel controls Bethlehem and makes life miserable for Christians there when it's the Palestinians.
I'm a very big Zionist guy. So
I got you. I got you. So you're an opinion journalist. So the mainstream media wasn't really afraid. They actually benefited from you being shut out. What was the second thing? You said there's two things you can't talk about in Brazil. The first is you can't question the elections.
And the second one, you can't criticize the Supreme Court. I can criticize Lula da Silva, the president. I can say whatever, pretty much almost whatever I want. During the elections, I couldn't. During the elections, I got gag orders from the Superior Electoral Court, from the Moraes, saying I couldn't say like that Lula was convicted for corruption in the past. I couldn't say that because they said it was true, but it would mislead the public. Truthful information that might mislead the public, because the public is dumb, right? In their opinion, they think the public's dumb. So if you tell them the truth, they might not get it right, and they might end up voting for Bolsonaro.
Right.
So, but in general, you can criticize Lula da Silva for now, and you don't go to prison. But if you criticize Demorais, he will come after you. And if you meet him in person, this is a real story, okay? So Demorais was traveling a few months ago. He was in Rome, okay? And this guy's hated in Brazil. So one person saw him, a guy saw him, a Brazilian guy, and apparently he said something bad. Like, we're all, you know how it goes.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sure you were very cherished as a mayor, but I know some people might not like you, and they see you on the street. They might say, "Hey, Gabe, you're lousy. Just after you, whatever." But that's life. It's like
welcome to America.
Yeah, you have to deal with that, and I deal with that as a journalist. Most of the reviews I get are good, but that could happen. And life goes on. Not for this guy. He flew back to Brazil. Both of them flew back to Brazil. And Demorais sent on a Sunday 6 cars of the federal police to his house at 6 a.m. to raid his house, get all his documents, all the computers, laptops, and all that. He investigated them. It's like gave him like a very hard time. At the end, the federal police concluded that there was no crime. By then, they spent money in lawyers. They were terrified. It was a disaster. To this day, we have been waiting for the video footage from the Rome airport. The police of Rome delivered to the Brazilian court and they seal it. The story that the media says was that the guy slapped Demorais or Demorais' son. It was like, the guy said, "I'd never done that. See the tape." And the Supreme Court said, "Nope, the tape's sealed.
It's sealed.
It's sealed. No, you never see it. No, never happened." And that's what happened. That's the part of this guy. Another guy in Brazil in a bar was talking to a friend. This is really scary. Okay. The guy was in a bar. It's very Brazilian culture, in a bar talking with friends, and he started trash talking Moraes. Moraes wasn't there. But one of his goons who was there, the guy took him to the federal police to give explanation why you're saying these bad things against him. So the 2 things you can say in Brazil, and I do both very often, is criticizing the electoral system and criticizing the Supreme Court.
So before we get into what happened with Elon Musk and X, which I think is super important because that's what's really bringing this to the fore. There, 2 years later, or more than that, that you've been dealing with this, and it's been going on since 2019, so almost for 5 years. But it's almost maybe they went a bridge too far now with X, and they found actually someone who's going to take them to task, and that's incredible. But I'd love to understand if you can explain a little bit how the Supreme Court has been able to grab this kind of power. So, and what's interesting, why it piques my interest, I'm sure you know, is there's so many parallels of what's happening, and maybe it's because of social media and the way information is shared around the world now. In the fights that we're having in the United States, we're seeing it in Israel pre-October 7th. Before dealing with this whole war, there was an internal war of sorts about the Supreme Court and how much power the Supreme Court should have or shouldn't have. Here in the United States, we've heard conversations on the far left and the progressive left of stacking the court to try to change the balance of the court. How did the Supreme Court in Brazil get so much power to be able to even initiate these overreaching quote unquote investigations and persecutions?
And that's a very good question. And I think the best parallel now is with Israel, because in the U.S. you have a balanced Supreme Court with, I would say, 5.5 conservative originalist justices. So but if it was the other way around, you wouldn't be having the same problem as Brazil. Because the problem is, and there's a very good book about it, a Jewish professor, a Canadian professor, her name is Ran Hirschel. He wrote a book called Towards Juristocracy. And the main idea of the book is about how the courts are really ruling the world right now. So the democracies are being transformed in juristocracies. And if you think about it, well, the courts became so when Montesquieu imagined the system that we have with 3 different branches of power, he called the judiciary next to nothing. Okay, in Federalist Paper 78, I think it was Hamilton, that he was writing about the three powers, and he talked about the judiciary power. And he says, look, there's not really a risk of the judiciary becomes a dictatorial power because they don't have the power of the purse or the power of the sword. So there's not a chance. And I think that's very interesting because, first of all, there was no judicial review then. Judicial review was like 20 years later, right? And it made sense because, well, the judges they have to follow the law, whatever is written there. So, and you had two basic schools of hermeneutics. You had the textualists, which believes that you need to follow the text of the law, and the originalists that believe you have to try to figure out what was the original intent.
Yeah, and how would it apply today?
Of the legislator. And, well, since then, everything changed. You now have the idea of the living constitution. The constitution is a living body. The laws are a living body. They change with times. So that means the judges don't have to follow the law anymore. They have, because the law changed. It's a body under evolution. So that means they can do whatever they want. Pretty much whatever they want. And that's where you go to school. Not Harvard, right?
No.
If you go to Harvard, so Harvard Law School gave birth to most of these bad ideas.
No, I went to University of Michigan, undergrad, and then American for law school.
Good. But
no Ivies for me. That's not why, but I'm glad I didn't go.
So the most of the bad ideas come from there. This dominated the way of thinking in law schools all over the world. So no, the law in Brazil does not allow them to do that. Yes, the Constitution of Brazil protects free speech, but, well, it's a living body. There are principles that are more important than the letter of the law. And they just do whatever they want.
So the police is, for example, just to get a little bit in details, the police is a federal police in Brazil, right?
Yes.
So it's a national federal police with, I assume, a national commissioner.
In Brazil, we have the federal police, just like in the U.S. You have the federal police, which deals with federal matters. And you have state police as well.
Okay, so since when did the Supreme Court have control over the police to be able to issue arrest warrants and go out and search warrants?
Well, by definition, the police is an executive branch arm, but they decided, so they acquired the power of the sword. So they decided that they could have their own police responding directly to them. It's part of federal police, but it's not. So they have their own team, everyone working full time for them. It's like it's a lot of people.
So who's this? Which branch of the government is supporting their efforts? Is it the executive? Is it Lula who's supporting, at least tacitly supporting their efforts, or is it the legislature?
So until December 2022, when Bolsonaro was in office, they were by themselves with some leniency from the legislature. Okay, and I can explain why. Right now, then after Lula, then the executive branch is supporting them. So now they're working together. So that's why I call this the Lula-Moraes regime, because Moraes is more powerful than Lula, way more. Musk is right. But they're working together. They're joining efforts. So the Attorney General now joined the Misinformation Board. Remember, Americans created a Misinformation Board for a while. Didn't last. But they're joining the Misinformation Board with the Supreme Court, with the Electoral Court, to share information. Now the FCC in Brazil, our equivalent to SEC, it's called Anatel, they have the power to shut down websites without court orders anymore, without the requisition of court orders. They shut down stuff immediately if this board identifies that spreading misinformation.
And I assume it's an unelected board. They're appointed by
Yeah, the bureaucrats.
Right, they're bureaucrats. That's incredible. Let's talk first of all before we shift over. I just want to note that last week on the podcast we had a federal judge sitting in the chair you're sitting in,
Oh, cool.
and we were talking about he took a trip to Israel with 14 federal judges from around the country, and we were talking about a lot of different issues. And I asked him about the perception, the public perception that the courts they've always been politicized, but that they've really they've reached a level of where the goal of judges of calling balls and strikes and seeing things how they are has been lost. At least that's the perception. He obviously pushed back, as a young judge who's a great judge and has an impeccable reputation here locally and nationally, actually. So he's definitely one of the good ones. But there's definitely a question. It's something we have to pay attention to. We're seeing it all over the world when it goes awry, especially at the Supreme Court level.
You can't explain to the public why Trump is being charged in New York. You can't. It's like no one look at that and does not read BS.
Right.
It's very obvious. Same thing with what's going on in Georgia. Same thing with what's going on with the classified documents. We know it. Everybody knows it. And the problem with that is that the reputation. So this is what the left has been doing. That really pisses me off, because the whole idea of the Marxism. Okay, Karl Marx. Let's go back to the origin. Well, his idea was that there was a superstructure protecting the infrastructure, and the infrastructure was the economical system. So, but in order to protect this economical system, you had a bunch of stuff like a shield on top of it, and that was all the institutions, the military, the churches, the religions, the culture, the structure of the society, the traditions. All that was only to protect the infrastructure, which was the economical model. So the idea of the Marxists is we need to destroy everything that's on the top so we can have the revolution and change the capitalism into socialism or communism. That was Marx's idea. So what the left does, and they have been doing it very successfully, is that they have been destroying the credibility of every institution that society trusts. So let me give you an example. Mainstream media. What's the trust on mainstream media right now? The trust on media right now, if among conservatives, is less than double digits within certain polls. Science, the academia. Who trusts Harvard now?
Right.
Do you trust Harvard School? It used to be great. Ivy League schools. Oh, these guys had all the respect in the world. Science. Well, the CDC. And that goes for the courts even the churches, but that goes for the courts as well. And what they're doing, and they're very successful in this. I don't know if they know what they're doing, if they're planning, but it's working, is they destroy the credibility of the judiciary system. And that's happening all over the world. Yeah,
the danger here again is how short-sighted it is, right? Everything, politics is a pendulum. You look at countries like Brazil or Argentina. The president was here yesterday. I got to see him. Countries, you flip a switch every couple of years and you have the exact opposite in the political party. So whatever systems that one party destroys, then it impacts when it swings the other way. I think when it comes to these cases around the country with regards to Trump, the part that I agree with what you're saying, the part that you didn't say, but a lot of people say it's this big coordinated effort from the quote unquote left. I don't think it's coordinated. I think what happens is you have it's almost like a lone wolf system, which is much more dangerous when you talk about counterterrorism. The one thing that's impossible to stop or almost impossible to stop are lone wolves. And that's really what we have when we have local state prosecutors going after the former president. And now, everyone knows the Republican candidate for president, presumptive. It's not that there's this, Joe Biden is sitting in his desk saying, okay, you do this and you do the other. But if enough of that information is out there and enough of that narrative is out there, it inspires lone wolves. It's a very similar concept.
Plus, you put all the incentives in place for people to do it, right?
Absolutely.
And no punishment or consequences or accountability if it doesn't work. What's going to happen to Alvin Bragg?
Right.
Is it going to be good? Was it good for his career or not?
Well, no one knew his name before, so yes, it's good for his career.
And he was funded by Soros, right?
Right.
So it was good. Well, his boss liked it.
Yeah.
So, look, I mean, they have a system of incentives in place, and that's way more powerful than a conspiracy.
Yeah.
Way more powerful. When you set up a system of incentives and no accountability to one side, and to the other side, on the other hand, you have a system that anything you do, they'll come after you. So let's think as a journalist, for example. I have two doors. One door is I'm a leftist, I'm a liberal, and I support Lula and I support Moraes. It's like, my life will be beautiful. It's like, I'll go to mainstream, I'll get huge contracts, sponsors, I'll have dinner with all the beautiful people. It's like, it's awesome. The other door is, no, I go against these guys. And anything that I do, they'll come after me. So they'll cancel my passport and all that. So you create an incentive. Someone now is deciding to be a journalist, and this guy is looking at these two possibilities. Same thing with doctors. Let's say in COVID, you could be like a doctor that's not very known, not very bright. You'd be on TV like, what was the name of the guy that was Biden advisors for COVID? It was not Fauci, the other guy. The guy was on TV like more time than anyone in the history of mankind in the time that it's like he made his career. He went to the White House. What happened to Peter McCullough? It's like some guys, they had their reputation destroyed. So you created a system of incentives.
Yeah, there's always an incentive like that. When Trump became president, the best incentive, if you were a political commentator that was Republican, if you wanted to speak bad about the president, you'd get hired immediately by CNN and MSNBC to have so they can show around the Republican that would speak bad about the president, or in Hollywood.
Try to be a conservative in Hollywood. You'll be destroyed in 5 minutes. Yeah,
there's actually a lot of conservatives in Hollywood, except they do it in the closet, right?
Exactly.
So let's talk about what's brought all this to light. And I really wanted, if you can help walk us through, if we take a step back a little bit, this Twitter issue with the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court issued an order, and Elon Musk is now saying they're not going to comply with the order on taking down accounts. Can you just lay out what happened and where we're at now?
So the Supreme Court has been issuing orders for quite some time, as I told you, since 2019 at least. And every social media platform has been following it, okay, including X. So Elon Musk purchased X in 2022. Yeah. And he released the Twitter files. Michael Schellenberger and other journalists published the Twitter files in the U.S. In the U.S., we learned that the deep state was working with social media to censor conservatives, to shadow ban people, shadow ban stories, censor stories like the Hunter Biden laptop and all that. We learned that the deep state was actually doing it informally, sort of, with even people from the FBI working on Twitter. It's like but everything was very informal. Then Schellenberger last week released the Twitter files Brazil that showed that we have the same virus, just having different means for the virus to attack. So everything that was done informally in the U.S. was being done by a court in Brazil. So
by the Supreme Court.
By the Supreme Court. And other courts as well. But the Supreme Court was one taking the lead. This justice became all-powerful. Everything related to the internet would go to him. And the Supreme Court originally, that's very interesting. In Brazil, the Supreme Court only has jurisdiction to try people that have one thing they call the privilege court, which is if you're a public official from Congress, the Congress members or president, they're the only ones that can be judged by the Supreme Court. Regular citizen like myself, we go to the first degree judge, like a regular judge. But this guy decided no, because this involves authorities as well. And although you might not be related to them, I'm granting myself the jurisdiction to deal with you as well, which is obviously illegal, bluntly illegal. Everyone agrees it. But anyways.
But there's no court above the Supreme Court.
Exactly. Who are you going to appeal to?
Right.
Anyways, so the Twitter files found out that Brazil, that the court was doing all that. And that was big, and everyone found out. And they were really banning hashtags. And it's not like hashtags like let's murder babies. No, it's not, no, it's like screw the Jews. No, it was not that. It was like, we want printed votes right now. It's like hashtags.
Right, so just different political opinions even.
It's like even asking for reforms on the electoral system. And they said, no, this is a threat to democracy. It's like, let's say U.S. say we want to recount the votes, hashtag recount the votes. In Brazil, it was not even that. People were trying to mobilize to pass a law that required the electronic system to print out a receipt that would go to a ballot box, and we would be able to match and recount.
By the way, the courts here provide extra protections for that kind of speech. That's the very speech that's meant to be protected by the First Amendment.
Exactly. And that was, in Brazil, was a threat to democracy, hate speech, attack to the institutions. And that was, we have proofs. It's undeniable. We have documents of Twitter saying, look, they're asking to shadow ban that sort of thing. And more than that, they're asking information about everyone that shares the hashtag. Regular citizen. And these are the guys that cooperate in the U.S. are cooperating with the FBI, NSA, whoever, CIA, like deep state. They're cooperating. They're mind blown with how things are in Brazil. Like, these guys are asking for stuff that not even the NSA asks for. It's like not even like when you're dealing with terrorists.
And you're talking about the Supreme Court is asking Meta and the other social media companies here in the U.S. for this information, user information, and they're asking with subpoenas, I assume, right, that they have to comply with, or they feel like they have to comply with.
And that they felt, and they did comply. And there's one point of the conversation where the Twitter guys in Brazil, they're saying, well, now they're asking for information without even court orders, and Meta and Google are complying, and they're saying. And some of the citizens that are asking for it are not even under Brazilian jurisdiction. So let me unpack this to you. The police in Brazil, so that's not even a court. The police in Brazil asked for information from foreign citizens in Brazil, and they got it. So your privacy, let's say you shared a hashtag and you were here. You like me, you saw me. It's like Paulo's sharing a hashtag.
So the advice you're telling me is no hashtags when I promote this podcast.
Yeah, maybe.
But by the way, maybe that's why
I'm telling you is use a VPN.
But the U.S. Congress, it's been revealed, I think Elon Musk revealed it, that the Congress has sent them a letter asking for some information on the inquiry on his relationship with the Supreme Court, how they've been pressing X. Now it makes sense to me as you're explaining, because the thing that would be relevant specifically, more beyond politics and optics and media, right? Interesting things to talk about in podcasts. For a real congressional inquiry, it would be relevant to see if they're coming after American citizens' private information, right? In an unjust manner.
And there's another side of it as well, which is the United States has on the Foreign Affairs Committee, they have a Human Rights Committee that oversees the situation on human rights all over the world. And the U.S. deals differently with countries that do not respect the human rights. It's part of the U.S. foreign policy, right? If you were murdering, and
we're not very consistent in this country on how we apply that. But yes,
I know.
On paper, you're right.
Especially in the Middle East, right?
Yes, especially in the Middle East, really all over the world.
But you have some dilemma with that. But we need to assess the situation.
Sure.
And I don't think the world recognizes Brazil still as a dictatorship
at all.
So when they see Brazil and Venezuela, they look at Venezuela and it's like, oh, that's a dictatorship. But they see Brazil and they don't see it as a dictatorship. Well, let me tell you something. X is operating just fine in Venezuela. And Elon Musk says that requests by the Brazilian Supreme Court are more draconian than what comes from Maduro. Because
American public opinion, when we're talking about from the political elite on the left, on the Democrat side, they were ecstatic, if I recall, when Lula won, because Bolsonaro for them was a Trump-like figure, right? And they were finally, like Biden, was coming in to save the day.
Well, Biden elected Lula.
Right.
And I'm saying that not in a figure of speech. I'm saying that the Biden administration sent the CIA director, the Secretary of Defense, and the advisor for foreign affairs to Brazil multiple times, and other public officials to meet, blackmail, and put pressure on Brazilian military leaders, public officials and bureaucrats to not challenge the election results. So they were the ones backing Moraes. And that's on the Financial Times. You know why it is in the Financial Times? Because they brag about it. They're like, we saved Brazilian democracy. We sent people to put pressures. Like, okay, let me understand here, because this is like, it's almost like you hate America. You're sending, the Department of State is going out of their way to make sure a guy that hates America get elected, because Lula hates America. I mean, Lula is the most pro-Hamas guy in the planet. Apparently, theoretically, America supports Israel. So Lula is supporting the other side. Lula is supporting Iran. We had Iranian ships. He's trying to welcome Iran to BRICS. We have Iranian ships docking in Brazilian ports and throwing parties under Lula. We're harboring Iranian warships. Okay, Nicolás Maduro is sought by the Department of Justice as a narco-terrorist. Okay, there's a multi-million-dollar reward for his capture in the United States. First thing that Lula did when he took office was to normalize relations with Venezuela and to receive Nicolás Maduro in Brazil with all the honors. So, and all the drug cartels, Lula is very lenient with them. So America's war on drugs, used to have a war on drugs here in America. So it's like Brazil is the safe harbor for all the drug cartels now. So, and of course, if you look at China, during the Lula first run, that's when the U.S. Was the first one commercial partner of Brazil for 200 years until Lula got in office, and then China became number one. And now China is purchasing the whole country. And Brazil is working with China, and Brazil is now trading with China, not in U.S. dollars, but a part of it's already in yuan. And Brazil is pushing the whole BRICS to adopt the yuan as the international currency.
Yeah, and it's a way to give the stiff arm to the American economy and to really impact the American dollar.
Yes. So why would you go out of your way to make sure this guy gets elected when the other guy? So you have two options. One is don't interfere. The second one is, well, give some support to the guy that's the biggest ally the United States had in Southern Hemisphere for like 25 years.
Yeah, so just to react to that, despite the theatrics about others interfering with our elections, which they shouldn't, and we should fight against foreign countries, especially interfering with our elections, absolutely. But the U.S. is famous for interfering with other countries' elections, and I'm just thinking of Obama during the Obama years when it came out in one of these exposés of files where they were funding groups in Israel and protests outside of the prime minister's house. And I mean, they're doing it now. Schumer's doing it publicly now from the Senate floor. But that's the first thing. But with regards to what's happening now with X, so X finally with Elon Musk decided they're not gonna comply with the court order.
But did you see why?
Tell me.
That was according to Elon. First of all, I think we've been fairly successful and raised a little bit more of the awareness in the United States of what's going on in Brazil. Tucker was important. PragerU, people from PragerU were very important. It's like a lot of people start talking about Brazil, and I'm very grateful for them. The U.S. Congress started to hear us. We had Representative Chris Smith, as a Republican from New Jersey, tried to hold a hearing in the U.S. Congress about Brazil, about the human rights violations. Then he was blocked by his colleague on the Human Rights Commission, that was a Democrat, the McGovern, blocked Brazil from presenting. We had to cancel. It was very hard. But we've been able to raise more awareness and make this get to Elon somehow. Maybe he watched Tucker Carlson, I don't know. Then we get the Twitter files and all that. So that's a good thing. I think he was more aware. But also the demands from Brazilian court after Lula took office became unstoppable and unbearable, to the point that Brazil was asking them And that's very interesting. And that's something that also matters to the U.S. Congress. Well, first thing that might matter to the U.S. Congress is what was the type of role the social media played to on Brazilian election. That's interesting because there are American companies interfering in Brazil. Did they gain any money or advantage directly or indirectly? If they gain money, well, is that considered corruption? Does that violate FCPA? I don't know. It's a good question. That's one side. The other side is what they requested from Elon was to change the terms of service to remove accounts pretending it was them, but it was actually by the orders of the court. And that would do something beautiful for de Moraes because one, he could operate without anyone having any ability to fight it in courts because you wouldn't even know. It's like a sniper kills you. You're like, what happened here? You wouldn't know. And we learned that he was already operating with YouTube and Google to demonetize channel by their requests. And we thought it was YouTube, but it was them. So that's interesting. Second thing that we learned that would provide is the ability to remove profiles globally, even outside of Brazilian jurisdiction. Because right now, my social media account is my Twitter, my X, is blocked in Brazil, but you can see it just fine. Here we see it just fine. So that's why I started tweeting more to only in English. I don't tweet in Portuguese anymore because I tweet to the international community, not to Brazilians anymore. But if I was removed for violating terms of service, I would be removed globally. And that upsets Moraes, the fact that I still have a voice outside of Brazil. And he asked the social media platforms to remove the accounts globally. But they said, look, your jurisdiction only goes as far as Brazil. It's like, we can't do that. Otherwise, we might get sued outside of Brazil in other countries. In America, not that much, but in Europe, you could. So they did not comply. But in that case, they would remove profiles globally. And he would have the ability to remove U.S. citizen profiles and all that. So can you believe that? So that's when Elon said, look, that's insane. I purchased this. I spent $44 billion to buy this platform to restore free speech in the world. I can't start deplatforming people and pretend it was me, because otherwise, like, what am I doing here?
Yeah, he also said that some of the people on the list were actual elected officials, and for him to start deplatforming elected officials and journalists, right?
And journalists. And
so how does the story end with the Supreme Court now and Elon Musk and you? How does this end? Did they go a bridge too far? Is it going to be pushed back, do you think, from the groundswell in the public there, or is it they just continue going down this road?
It's not over yet. We're still watching it unfold.
How do you think it'll end?
I think there are two possibilities here. Well, one is Elon is going to make good on his word and it's going to lift restrictions in Brazil. And the moment he does that, X will be blocked in Brazil. And I think he should do it.
What impact will that have on the ground in Brazil?
A big one, because X has roughly 25 million users in Brazil, which is like 15% of the population, a little less. But it's the part of the population that matters the most. I'll explain why. Everyone in the financial market, just like in the US, uses X as a source of news. Journalists are addicted to X, and they use X to push their content as well, mainstream media and all that. It's like the same as in the US. And all politicians, including the left, you know what I know? It's funny. Alexander de Moraes, the guy who's doing all this, the only social media where he has an account is X.
That's amazing.
That's very funny. It's very ironic. So I think you wouldn't. It's already having this effect, but that would magnify and capitalize this effect of bursting the bubble. Like, I'm here, I've been doing eight shows a day talking about internationally about what's going on. Everyone wants to talk about Brazil now. 6 months ago, no one cared.
Right.
And all this was happening as well. But now Elon Musk put the spotlight.
Yeah,
on
that was a tipping point.
Exactly. So everyone wants to talk it. Congress is going to hold the hearing again. Elon might be invited. I hope he goes. So this creates international awareness. At the same time, it's creating domestic awareness for people, for the average Joe that's just taking care of his life. It was like, most people are not interested in politics all the time. We think they are.
Right.
We like to think they are. But it's like, if you ask the regular people, go around the street, it's like, they don't even know who you are. You were living in Bal Harbor.
No, they don't care.
They don't care. They don't know who the mayor is. They don't know who their congressman is. They don't know what's going on. They don't know about this fight. But these people use social media. And I've seen it. I've seen people from outside of the political interest area concerned with this. So that's one way. If Elon makes good on his word, the Supreme Court thinks, and they voiced that today, they think it's a bluff.
That he wouldn't give up that money, the revenues that he gets in Brazil.
Because that's your mindset.
Yeah, they're wrong.
I don't know. I
hope they're wrong.
I hope they're wrong. Yesterday I was on a space with X Spaces with and Musk was there, and he asked a question to a Brazilian congressman. He gave the Brazilian congressman a possibility to ask a question, and I was talking to the guy on WhatsApp. I was like, "Ask this," and he did ask the question, which was like, "Are you going to actually lift a restriction?" Elon started to answer, and then Spaces like crashed.
Yeah, his lawyers crashed Spaces and said, "Don't answer that question yet."
I don't know. I was like,
so one thing that would be very funny is if everybody moved to Truth Social, and then they sent the same subpoena to Donald Trump or to Devin Nunes, and says, "Hey guys, deplatform these people." That would be an interesting international incident, wouldn't it?
It should. It's unfortunate that Truth never became popular in Brazil.
Yeah, it's still growing here, although the shares are going up. The value of the company is going up.
They were able to fix this very hard situation. They were like getting funding. And
yes,
all that.
Exactly. I think we've gone a while. I think it's such an interesting discussion.
It is.
It's such an interesting discussion because usually we deal with things and it's philosophical. A lot in the United States when we're talking about the power of the courts, we're talking about how do you deal with quote unquote misinformation or disinformation, terms that I hate. I hate both of them. They're just falsities, right? Saying things that are falsehoods in media on important issues. What do you do with them? And people there's always an impulse. Well, maybe something can be done with it. And every time we go down the rabbit hole of saying, let's create a board, let's have someone evaluate things. It's always philosophical because yes, it happened during COVID. It happened during Hunter Biden. There are different instances. And I'm sure in the comment section, people will come up with all these different incidences, but still we're still on the fringe. When if we want to see what happens when there's too much power in one branch of government, when there's too much emphasis put on instead of free speech and elevating all ideas, including bad ideas, and letting the good ideas win, when there's too much emphasis put on let's put out the bad ideas and keep out the bad ideas, quote, to protect our democracy. This is what happens. Which is
define bad ideas, right?
Yes, exactly. Define bad ideas. You can't do it. And bad ideas are for people who try to do it are just ideas they don't agree with. Right. And what's going to be really interesting to watch unfold isn't just this Elon Musk controversy, but is how this impacts the next election in Brazil. Because obviously that's the big picture, I think, for the administration there. If they can keep out enough of these bad voices criticizing the government, criticizing the electoral process, then maybe their party can stay in power for longer and it won't flip back and forth. So, watching that unfold, I think is going to be the most interesting part for me from where I sit.
Well, in Brazil, everyone's fighting for different things. And I keep telling people, look, I have one priority, which is restoring free speech. Because if you don't have free speech, you can't fight for anything else without guns, right? You need It's like, so let's restore free speech. Let's create awareness on what's going on in Brazil. I think it's a cautionary tale to America. I really do. I think it's a cautionary tale to the world in the sense that what do you do? It's a good thing to ask for your more intelligent guests. What do you do with the courts that are all powerful? Because, okay, in Israel, I was watching closely. And I did a podcast here. and just about Israel, and it was about the judicial reform, because it matters a lot to Brazil.
Right.
And I was trying to understand it. I had a Jewish, a Harvard Law School friend here, like asking him questions, and very conservative. And okay, Israel approved and passed the judicial reform. Okay, the court decided it's invalid. So what do you do?
Well, they did that after October 7th on one piece of it, on the least controversial piece of it.
Exactly. So what do you do? How do you restrain the power of the Supreme Courts all over the world? How do you do that? And that can become a problem in America. You're 3 justices away of that. And that's what I'm saying. Look, do you think if you had like 6 Sotomayor in Supreme Court, you wouldn't be in the same situation as Brazil? You damn right you would. It's like, so that's what I'm trying to warn people. There is a problem. We use the system of republic that was envisioned for another time when there was no broad interpretation of the law. The judges had to abide to the law. Now we're using a system that judges can do whatever they want, not only judges, prosecutors as well. And that's why you see George Soros funding more prosecutors and judges than members of Congress.
And public defenders.
Exactly, and public defenders. Because the power is in the judicial system. It's not in Congress anymore. And if you think about it, let's say you're a billionaire and you want to change the world. And you want to change the world to your own image. Let's say you want to have the society more open. That rings any bells. Is it better to fund campaigns for Congress, and then you have to elect a large number of representatives, and then senators, and then you have the president? There's all this checks and balances. And of course, after all this, it goes to judicial review. Okay. Well, or you just get cozy with the guys on the top that do the judicial review, that can create laws. And don't tell me they can, because abortion was legalized in the US by a court. So it's way easier. They found a way around democracy to impose their views. And that's what's happening. After the national populist movement from the 2010s, the elites in the world, and that's not like, again, system of incentives, people with aligned interests, not conspiracy, not Klaus Schwab, like pulling like puppets. I don't believe in that. I believe in aligned interests, people meeting on the World Economic Forum, people going to the same schools, people going to the same parties, people creating incentives for those who to show their beliefs, to show off their beliefs as a luxury, to show that they're part of the elites. And these guys, they found a way around to do whatever they want with the world, despite of people. That's why, for me, this election this year is so important in the United States. I think it's the most important. Everybody says that every year. I've heard it so many times. I do believe this way. This year is the most important election in the history of the world. And I'll explain why. I don't believe any society that 70% of people think the president is mentally incapable would elect that guy. So I don't believe there's any chance Joe Biden gets elected fair and square. I'm not talking about fraud. I'm talking about other stuff as well. If Joe Biden gets reelected, half dead, I'm sorry to put it this way, but if Joe Biden gets elected, it means people lost their power completely. This back and forth that you described in the beginning, well, it shifts, politics change. Now it's Trump and tomorrow is Biden. That means nah.
So what do you mean they lost their power?
The people lost their power.
Do you mean that their power to think independently was taken away from them because of the structures that were put in place?
Their power to elect people who actually rule the country, representatives.
Yeah, I think it's different than that. I think that what we're seeing in our country a lot, it's not that people are losing the power to elect. You can make the argument that there are elections that people are influencing that the public isn't paying attention to. We see it in school boards, for example, where suddenly
That's
people
true.
are flooding school board races that would raise a couple $1,000, give them $100,000, put whoever you want, and suddenly you're impacting what you're learning in schools.
Right.
It's the same happened with the public defenders that no one ever paid attention to, or the prosecutors, and guys like George Soros and other folks decided we can affect society and impact society in the way that they think is good and most of us think is bad, but that they can affect society in a way went through the back door. No one's paying attention. But when it comes to people voting for president, it's like people voting for Biden, we're talking about the example you gave, but I think it applies really everywhere, is there is an impact when our societies is manipulated so much in a way, the way you think, in the way the algorithms are run on social media, on the fact that everybody lives in an echo chamber, right? And the fact that every news station is parroting the same talking points day in and day out. If you watch the same stations, they're all saying the same things every single day. And most people don't have the time or the care to dig into anything more. So if you go speak to a random person on the street, like you mentioned earlier, and ask them who you're going to vote for and why, most people are going to just parrot back to you something that they heard in the news or that's running on social media with 20 or 30 million views because the algorithm is pushing it, right? And then in a way, which I thought where you were going, which I hadn't thought of it this way, but in a way, people are losing their ability to think critically because of the way our society is going. And I think that's a lot of what we're seeing when it comes to elections. Those of us that are really into politics and into the nitty gritty, we think that people vote because of X or Y, but really they don't. They don't vote for any of these policy reasons. They vote for these top line tweets, let's say, for lack of a better word, right? These top line statements that are being parroted over and over and drilled into their minds, right? And then that's really what they go by. So why do they vote for Biden? Many people, because Trump is a threat to democracy. If you ask them what that means, they have no idea, but that's what they were told.
That's true, but that has always been true in a sense. The belief in the populist movement is that in general, the people will come to a better judgment than just an elite that selects someone. So meaning, yeah, most people will vote like that, but there's a general wisdom within the masses. And I think the general wisdom right now is that people understand that Biden is mentally incapable.
Sure.
That's my point. And if you talk to the average Joe on the street, you ask, like, do you think Biden's fit to office? They'll say, no, this guy looks like a mummy. He's dead. He's half dead. The regular people. So there's no way you're a public official. You know how elections are hard. If anyone thought you were mentally incapable, you would never win an election forever.
Right.
So if Biden wins, means the system was rigged. That's what I'm saying. Because there's no way he can win like that. Even with people thinking Trump, and you're absolutely right, some of them, the media manipulates and all that. We know you're absolutely correct. There's no echo chamber. I agree with you 100%. But my point's not that. The whole world watched what happened in the United States in 2020, and no one gave the public an explanation. What's the explanation for all these ballots showing up under the table after a bathroom flooded in Pennsylvania? What's the explanation for what happened in Fulton County? No one gave any explanation. They say, shut up. This is a big lie. We're not going to, the court said we don't want to hear it. We don't want to touch it. So no one I'm waiting to, I was on Dinesh D'Souza this morning, as I told you. I'm waiting for someone to review 2,000 News. I'm waiting. I'm really waiting. I'm eager to find an explanation. The whole world watched that. And they got away with it. We have court decisions like in Arizona saying that the Arizona bureaucrats violated the law, not checking, not requiring the signature verification that they wanted to. We had the same decision in the Supreme Court in Pennsylvania right now a couple of weeks ago. And we have the Democrats pushing for, you guys don't realize how nuts is that. I don't know any country in the world that does not require voter ID. I've never heard of it. This is so dumb, so stupid, so impossible to justify that even in Brazil, we require voter ID. And everyone votes on the same day. There's no like voting by mail. But that's kind of, it's a little insane. Not requiring ID, it's It's on purpose. And what I'm saying is, what everyone is watching right now is not if Trump is going to win. It's if he's going to be elected. It's two different things. I don't think there's any chance that he loses fair and square. If the U.S. still holds elections, because some states do, Florida holds elections. Do you believe Georgia holds election? I'm not sure. After what happened to Kerry Lake in Arizona, I'm not sure Arizona holds elections. I'm not sure Pennsylvania holds election. I am absolutely positive California doesn't hold elections. Look, if you can harvest ballots, it was like, it's not an election. So that's my point. And I know this is controversial, but I'm speaking as someone that was very skeptical about it. And I still look for explanations. Same thing with Brazil. So you asked me, was that fraud in the election in Brazil, Bolsonaro? I'll say, I don't know. I didn't used to think that there was. Then I saw some convincing evidence. I presented to the public and they censored me instead of giving explanation. So that's like, if you're a mayor of Bal Harbor and someone gives me like a report saying that you're stealing public money, and I present it to you and ask for explanations, and instead of explaining it to me as a public official you are, and you lock me up, you bet. You're damn right. I'll think you're corrupt.
Yeah, for sure. That's what's happening. But look, to respond, and without going down the total rabbit hole of the election in 2020, whether there was fraud, there's always fraud in elections. That's not a question. To say that it's rigged, the election rules are there for everybody. I think there was a big error in the Republican Party not to play by the rules that were unfair, like harvesting ballots, telling people not to mail in their votes because the mailing in votes is giving in to the left, and don't do that. And the Democrats killed the Republicans on that. The Democrats played the election game, if you go district by district, far better than the Republicans.
That's
and
also true.
that those are free and fair elections, because those are rules that are set for everybody. Are the rules all fair? No, but as long as they're the same for both sides, you have to learn how to play the game. And I think Republicans now, if you talk to anyone at the RNC,
do you think any rules that we agree upon make an election fair?
No, sure. I probably misspoke when I said that. Right. But the rules that we're seeing now, fair or unfair, when you're talking about fairness, the handicap the Republicans had was self-imposed in the 2020 election, because they decided not to play by the rules that are set, the rules of the road.
Well, there are some moral rules as well, right? Let's say, for example, it's an informal rule now that you can print as many ballots as you want and nothing will happen to you, because you'll go to court and a judge will look at you and say, no, I don't want to touch this. It's an informal rule. It's happening. And let's say it's an informal rule and everybody knows it. Would you do it? I wouldn't, because I have the moral restraint of not falsifying documents. I don't believe the left has that. Most of them. I don't. I think they think they're stopping Hitler to go back to power, and they will do whatever it's necessary. I keep saying, when I report to Brazil, I say, if the Democrats had to explode a nuclear bomb in New York to stop Trump from being elected, they would. It's like no question about it. Most of them would, because it's like, yeah, we're going to kill like, I don't know, 20 million people in New York, but we'll save 300 million.
Yeah, you're saying they kind of live by the utilitarian argument, like a John Stuart Mills kind of thing.
Definitely.
But look, the elections for me, I think that's excuse finding for the Republicans. As a Republican who's involved in elections,
I think
there's a lot of things that Republicans can and should do to win.
Yes.
First, start by electing good candidates.
Yes.
Second, starts by actually going out and getting votes, and not just taking things for granted.
Yes.
And yes, if there are election rules in certain states that seem ridiculous and seem that they shouldn't be that way, fight to change them. But while they're there, you got to play by those rules to win, because you're damn right that the other side's going to play by those same rules, and you're going to walk away with your clean white shirt, but as the loser, as opposed to actually winning within the law. So listen, with regards to what's happening in Brazil, I want to just say, because I have a flight to catch since I got to run. But thank you so much for coming out.
Of course.
The fight that you are having, that the X is having, that the entire, I was about to say the entire right, the conservative one, but it's not. It's really the people of Brazil. This is impacting everybody, whether they know it or recognize it now or not. It impacts everybody, and it impacts everybody outside of Brazil as well. For whatever reason, the United States has always had, I've said, a blind spot for Latin America, but sometimes it seems worse than a blind spot. And when they play in Latin America, when we in the United States play in Latin America, we seem to always pick the wrong sides. We see in Argentina, finally, we have a pro-America president, and the U.S. is not reaching its arm out to try to bring them into the fold.
Contrary.
On the contrary, exactly, which is, again, contrary to American interest. But we're watching with great interest in it. And I thank you for taking on the fight and for being out there as much as you are. And again, for driving down all the way here for a little discussion with me.
It was a great pleasure. I love having good conversations, and this was fun.
Thanks so much. And thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll see you next week. Make sure to like, subscribe, follow, share, all the great things you do to support podcasts. See you next week.